day, everyone. Today is the 22nd of May. I have Eric beside me. We missed him last week. Eric, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Good, thanks. And welcome to our I think it's our sixth now coffee chat in a row through this pandemic and through the plethora of releases that have been going on from our federal government around relief for businesses and individuals. So how's the week, Eric? What's happened?
The week has been good. There's a lot of announcements that came up, some interesting things going on. Before we get into it, again, like usual, we are being recorded, and we have you guys all on mute. If you have a question, feel free to type your questions into the chat. We're happy to answer them whenever they come through. But this week has been interesting.
Actually, I do want to say something about that. Sure. Last week, without you, I couldn't manage the chat, so I just opened it up and let people kind of ask questions.
Yep.
So, we have more people than last week, but we don't have 50 people. So perhaps maybe we'll allow everyone to, maybe unmute them. And if you do have a question, unmute yourself, ask the question. And I think it's manageable that we can answer those questions. If we find it gets too unmanageable, maybe we'll go back to the chat. But we'll give you access to ask a question, and we'll answer it as we go, Eric. So maybe we'll try that this week.
Sure. All right. It might be good if I've just unmuted everyone, but if you could just mute yourselves for now, just so we can reduce feedback, that'd be great. But having said that, we can go on. So this week has been interesting. One of the first things early, I think Monday, was the change to the CEBA, the business loan for the $40,000, some changes there. So that's one of the things we'll go over today. And the other thing that we really want to touch on is this coming Monday, the 25th, they're going to be starting the small business loan, the
commercial rent.
Exactly, the commercial rent. So we'll talk about that in detail because there's a lot to digest in that and lots of things to take a look at. But let's start with the CEBA. What are some of the things that happened?
Yeah, the Canada Emergency Business Loan. When it first came out, this is probably the third or fourth iteration of the program. If everyone remembers, when it first came out, it was providing a $40,000 loan to companies. There's a couple criteria. One of the biggest criteria initially was you had to have a payroll threshold between $50,000 and $1 million. That quickly changed down to $20,000 to $1.5 million of payroll. And that opened it up to a bunch of companies. But there's a lot of companies that it wasn't available to for a variety of reasons. One is, say startups that didn't have payroll yet because the owners were taking dividends, or companies such as perhaps hair salons. I think Mr. Trudeau, that was one of the companies he referred to, or professions, where they pay everyone as subcontractors and they don't have payroll, including the owner of the company, and startups. And I think I already said startups, so startups twice. Startups are important. So they never fit into that group of businesses. So they weren't eligible for that $40,000 loan. Of course, if you pay it back by Christmas of 2021, you only have to pay back $30,000. So you get a 25% reduction. And of course, there's no interest on that loan. So it's a really good program. It's meant to be used to help pay for fixed expenses. But there's a bunch of companies that weren't eligible. But that changed this week. And if you've been watching some of our other shows, we've been talking about some of these things where, it's always been, payroll's been a big threat. T4 income has been a threshold in many programs. And then as these programs have launched out, the government has realized that, many businesses maybe operate a little differently, and they're still bona fide businesses that employ people in a different way that help the Canadian economy move forward. So now, if you have a business, and you don't have payroll, you can still apply for the CEBA. The criteria is a little different. I think one of the biggest things is you don't need payroll, but you do need to have expenses between $40,000 and $1.5 million. So these are reoccurring kind of expenses for businesses such as insurance, rent. So very interesting how they announced this program. At the same time, they announced the new commercial rent program, saying, here's $40,000. Pay your 25% of your rent program, and let's get all this rent off the table on burden companies so they can go back out and earn income and employ people in a variety of ways. So if you are a business out there that didn't have employees paying them T4, but you had subcontractors, you had expenses between $40,000 and $1.5 million. That's a huge range. and you only took compensation as a business owner as dividends, and you're operating a bona fide business, you're now eligible to apply for that $40,000. Now, interesting enough, I did a little bit of research last night, and I tried to apply for the CEBA through the banks. Most of the banks hadn't updated their criteria yet. For some of my companies, I use ATB. I sent a note to ATB, and I think about 7 o'clock this morning, the ATB banker said that ATB has been updated. I believe RBC has been updated today. So hopefully by the end of this coffee chat, or at least by the end of today, all the major banks should have updated their websites for that criteria. That includes having the expenses between 40 and 1.5 million, and you can apply. The money comes very quickly. We've had clients get it in as quick as 3 days under the old criteria, but since it's the same program with enhanced criteria, I see no reason why there would be any more delay than the 3 to 5 business days, though they say 7 to 10. So really looking forward to seeing this program in its application. I'm really happy that the government opened it up for fixed expenses like rent, insurance, property tax, supplies, subcontractors. I think it's a really good program.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah, that's and the CEBA program is really good. That really leads us into our next one, the rent reduction, the CSRA is what we're calling it. That's a big one, and applications open up.
Sorry, I want to actually just ask if there's any questions on the new rules around CEBA, because I see some of our guests, I do know them, and some of them may have some questions around that. Okay, well, if you have questions later on in the program, please feel free to just ask them about the CEBA. Maybe we'll jump into the rent relief.
Yeah.
And you can kind of percolate some of those thoughts around the CEBA program. You're not going to find a lot right now, at least about 45 minutes ago, still on CRA's website, they hadn't updated the criteria, which is frustrating since it was announced early in the week. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of secondary sources that have outlined all the criteria around $40 to $1 million. You could be a consulting company. They call it an operating company, but it's meant to pay a bunch of expenses. So as long as you have those expenses and you qualify as, with the other criteria, Canadian company, operating Canada, yada, 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 you'll be fine.
For sure. Okay. Yeah, 100%. So for the CSRA, or the rent subsidy, sorry, that's a difficult one to wrap my head around, but the applications open up on this Monday, the 25th. Having said that, they are hoping that people can apply in waves. I don't have the actual criteria right now, but in
Alberta, it's Monday. You can start as early as Monday for Alberta.
That's right.
You know that. Ontario is Tuesday. Maritimes and Quebec, I believe, are Wednesday, and then it opens up for everyone else on Thursday.
Perfect. So with the applications opening up, we just want to kind of go over the eligibility, just because I know it's like kind of complicated. There's lots to digest there, and there's some significant changes that we want to take a look at. Kind of the first one is remembering that you need to be a commercial property. So the Canadian Mortgage Company has outlined what they consider to be a commercial property for this specific instance. They basically have said that you just have to have a small business tenant. That doesn't mean you qualify for the actual benefit, but it does mean that you have a commercial property. You just need to be, one of your tenants must have a small business. The reason they bring this up is because, some properties have other tenants, like multifamilies and stuff like that. So like people operate out of places that aren't necessarily office spaces or considered truly commercial, which is okay for the instance of this subsidy. Having said that, so the first thing is a small business tenant. Then we also have, in order to qualify for the actual subsidy, your small business tenant has to be impacted. Now, the impact has to be a 70% drop in revenue based on either the January and February average compared to April, May, and June, or you can use April, May, and June of the previous year.
Okay, so much like the
might have to return it. Don't see. They're open.
Someone's talking. much like the wage subsidy. Same criteria as the wage subsidy from a revenue threshold.
Exactly. So if you're familiar with using the CEWS calculation, then this is very similar to that.
Okay.
Having said that, the other thing with the small business tenant, to qualify as an impacted small business tenant, you must have a cap of $50,000 in rent.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been, before, the last time we spoke about this, it wasn't quite clearly defined as to what exactly rent included and exactly how that was supposed to be broken down. But they've come out and they have on the website, it details it very nicely, but it talks about what is considered to be eligible rent for the purposes of this and what is not eligible rent. They essentially say that eligible rent includes your net, basic, or minimum lease payments and regular installments for your op costs.
Okay.
What doesn't get included is basically interest and penalties, default payments, and all that stuff that isn't related to the rent or the eligible period. And also any repairs and maintenance, damage costs, and all that stuff that is paid to third parties and not to the landlord.
Okay, so that's important. If now I would think 99% of all leases would require what we call operating costs to be paid to the landlord. But if there is a situation where you are paying operating costs directly to the third party, whether it's the mechanic or the plumber, those won't qualify. So make sure that you're running those expenses through the landlord or the property management company that's managing the property.
For sure, yeah. And it's really important with all of that for the rent specifically is that it's outlined and detailed in an actual rent agreement.
Mm-hmm.
They've come out and said before, even in instances where you have an operating company and a holding company or related companies that have these rent agreements, you must have a clearly defined and legally enforceable rent agreement between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important to have as well. Having said that, again, there's still the moratorium that you are required to have for the periods, and loan forgiveness and all that has to be in place. So let me just look at my notes here. I think that is for that. So the eligibility, like if you qualify for all those periods, you must apply for all 3 periods at the same time.
Yeah.
That's really important because lots of people have questions about, well, June's not here yet and June is one of the eligible months at this time. How are we supposed to, figure that stuff out? Now, you can wait until after June. That is an option. However, you can apply now using the tenant's estimated June, their projections, their forecasts. The criteria is, again, on the website. So it's important to take a look at there and consult with your accountants and stuff like that to make sure that you're recording everything well.
I think one of the interesting, and now you're saying you can apply. I think it needs to be really clear that the only person that can apply, of course, is the landlord themselves or the property owner. We've had a lot of questions about that, and if you've been paying attention to the media, there's been a lot of things around, what if my landlord doesn't want to? Well, as it currently stands, if the landlord doesn't want to apply for whatever reasons, you're not going to get the program. You're not going to get the essentially the 75% wage rent subsidy. And then the only other options are the traditional kind of lease remediation clauses inside your rent. What we've been telling our landlords and our tenants clients is to be very clear about the policy, right? So if you guys are tenants, what I've been telling my landlords is they should be communicating to their tenants, and I've given a little list to them as a recommendation to ask. One is the criteria for the program, and it's all on the CMACH website, and they have it nicely laid down. One is the tenant, so if you are a tenant, you have to sign an attestation. Second, the landlord has to sign an attestation. Third, the lease has to be provided. And fourth, there's a document, a lease amendment document. The CMHC website has a sample of it. I suspect every landlord will peruse it, probably send it to his lawyer to see what it looks like and see if it's enforceable in Alberta. If you're a lawyer out there, it might be an opportunity for you to get some more clients and do some more work by maybe setting up the sample they have on CMHC is a one pager. It's probably all you need. I'm not a lawyer, so I won't get into those details. But that needs all to be submitted at the same time. So I would say that you need to get your ducks in a row. You need to download that attestation. You need to sign it. You need to probably in writing ask your landlord for the subsidy. I know some landlords that are coming back and saying, well, did you apply for the CBUP? Did you, what other remedies have you done? I want to see your revenue to make sure you're actually dropped to 70%, and you have a viable plan to carry on, so that they're comfortable not, maybe kicking you out. So I would encourage, if you are a tenant, to get all those things, all those ducks in a row, and not just go to your landlord and say, I want this, because they're going to come back and say, great, you got a bunch of homework to do, get it done, and then we'll apply together. So there's definitely a relationship issue there that needs to be sorted out. So once again, sign the attestation as a tenant, get your lease out, confirm with your landlord that they'll sign the attestation. There's a lease amending document, for lack of better terms, on the CMHC. Probably download that. Get rid of the sample that they have a date on that says, or a stamp that says sample. So whether you have someone repunch it in, or talk to the lawyers, but get that signed off, because that has to be signed off, and then apply. I don't think you're going to see a rush happen next week. I think there's going to be lots of communication. I know as a landlord myself, I've had my property managers already send out communications to my tenants saying, these are the things I need from you so that we can apply collectively. So calling up or sending an email to your landlord probably isn't going to help. You need to get your homework done. You need to get on the CMHC website, fill out that paperwork so that they can apply in conjunction with all the support that you need to provide for them. Landlords, I would highly recommend that you look at the program and you make it as easy as possible for your tenants to use it, for sure.
Definitely, yeah. And it's important to remember that each one of the attestations has to be applied for all together for each one of the tenants. It all has to be applied for together. So if you're a landlord and you have lots of tenants, you need to make sure that you're getting all that in together at the same time.
For the same property.
Yes, for the same property. That's correct. Yeah. And it also, again, it is on a tenant basis. So if you have one tenant that qualifies and another tenant that doesn't qualify, you can still apply for the one tenant.
Yeah. So there's a lot of paperwork. So, I wouldn't be, I certainly wouldn't be, get on the phone with my landlord and yelling at him because there's a bunch of stuff there that needs to get done. And if multiple tenants are going to apply, you probably should knock on the door of your neighbor and say, hey, let's get this done together, so our landlord has no reason to delay on it, for sure. We do have a question.
Yeah. So it says, Reader's Digest version. If your revenue has not dropped 70% since last year, then there's no point in applying, correct? No, not correct. That is one methodology you can use in order to determine whether or not you're eligible. You can also use the average of January and February 2020. Yeah. So don't discount yourself immediately if you haven't dropped by 70% from last year. Similar to the Q's, the 75% wage subsidy, it's important to remember there is another option that you can use in order to determine. It's set in place so that there are options for people who may have had a significantly poor and abnormal 2019 year and somehow bounce back in the 2020 year. So remembering that January, February 2020 average can be used to compare to April, May, and June. So you do have to meet the criteria. It isn't all or nothing criteria, but as the question was asked to us, it can either be the January, February average or the same period last year. So you have two thresholds, but it does have to be 70%. There is no sliding scale. I know that's been one of the criticisms of the program. It's an all or nothing approach. So if you're down 69%, you're still pretty much hooped. To be fair, speaking of my grandfather's language, but nothing you can do unless it's 70%. Now, having said that, and I think we've seen this, Eric's been my partner here, who's been a lot of the calculations on the wage subsidy, and a lot of clients or friends in the business community would call me and say, I don't qualify. And I'd say, send me your stuff. And we'd look at it, and Eric would look at it, and we found that they did qualify by making a few, what I'd say, reasonable accounting adjustments using common accounting principles, and they did qualify. So
I wouldn't necessarily discount. If you know, if you're way off, you're going to be way off for sure. But if you're close, there might be some adjustments that we could help you with to get you on side.
For sure, definitely.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Are there any other questions on the rent relief? My personal thoughts is that it's not going to happen quickly. It's going to take a lot of dialogue with the landlord. And if it's a building with multiple tenants, then it's going to take a little while to get done. One other question I do have for you, Eric, is if I am an operating company and I have another company that owns the building, can I apply for the rent relief essentially for myself?
Yes, you can. It applies to all people. The only significant piece that is different, I guess, for the most part, with that situation is you must have a rent agreement that basically is at fair market value. So you can't just go ahead and charge any amount of rent that you want. That's the most important factor. Non-arm's length companies have to have a rent that is equal to fair market value, essentially what you would be able to get on the market anywhere else. Yeah.
So, and I know we have lots of clients like this who hold their buildings in a different company, and if they want to, and if their revenues have dropped by 70%, they have a fair market value lease agreement, they can certainly then apply for it. Absolutely.
So we have another question. It says, so if you have to apply for all 3 months, but we're only closed for 1 month, likely we wouldn't qualify.
So to be clear, I think what the individual is saying is, yes, you got to qualify for all. You got to apply for all 3 months at once. But if you only qualify for 1 month, you're going to get the rent relief for that month. So the answer is, though you may not qualify for the other 2 months, if you qualify for 1 month, you get the rent relief for that month. But once the landlord has submitted, because once again, it has to be the landlord that submits, he needs all the information. And if you submit for June, and this is where, maybe you want to wait till July to submit, or at least till June 15th when you know if you get it, how viable it is. And I think as a landlord, I'd say we're going to wait till June. We're not going to rush anything the first week. Is that so that we don't make any mistakes? Because once you submit, I don't see the mechanism for appealing or changing anything. So in that circumstance, you would qualify for the 1 month. You'd fill it out. You'd send it to your landlord. Your landlord would collect all the other tenants if that's the case, and he would submit all at once. So for some businesses, perhaps if there's 1 or 2 neighboring tenants and you're all closed for April and you've opened up now, and May you won't qualify and June you won't qualify, then you could probably fill it all out, tell your landlord to send it in, and you'll get your rent relief at that point for sure. Now remember, this isn't money coming back to you most likely, right? Because unless you paid everything, but I suspect if you've already paid all your rent and you're looking for money back, most likely once the landlord fills it out, he's probably going to hold that money and apply it to your future rent. I don't think there'll be a lot of refunds coming back to tenants. I could be wrong, but I suspect most landlords will hold that rent. By the time it gets processed, it's already going to be well into July most likely. So they'll probably just apply it to your July rent, I suspect is what's going to happen.
For sure, definitely. And it's also good to note that is allowed based on the program itself. The outline has essentially said that is an option. They can refund the money or they can hold it on account for you for future periods. And so if you're asking, can they even do that? Are they allowed to hold that money back? Yes, the landlord is definitely allowed to do that.
Okay. Any other questions? Great questions, by the way, on the rent subsidy. Any questions on the CEBA? Yeah, you have any extra comments on the CEBA?
I don't think I have any extra comments there. I believe for both, actually, both are not prepared on CRA. You don't apply on CRA. That's important to remember. Unlike the other programs that are out there, these are all applied for either through the bank or through the CMHC website. The CEBA is through your bank, and the CMHC is through your the rent reduction is through CMHC, which is on the CRA website. The link to get there, and the applications again open on Monday.
Okay.
I got a couple of questions. John, it's Vince. Sorry, I'll start my video. Do you see me? Oh, here I am.
Beautiful.
No, not really, but I haven't had a haircut in 2 months. Going for one today. The question about SEBA, comparing SEBA to that regional recovery relief fund, I get it, it's either or, but do you have any thoughts as to picking either one, or should go through SEBA?
Well, yeah, I mean, so for those of you that don't know, and we haven't talked much about it to be fair, but the government has said, we've created all these programs, they have all these rules, and they should fit majority of the people. But if you don't qualify for these rules, you can go to this other program, and it's designed to pick up all the people that don't fall into the cracks. Now, to be fair, Vincent, I haven't seen you actually apply through the diversification program. So I'm not quite sure what the end details are on what's forgivable, what are the interest rates, stuff like that. So specifically to your question, if you qualify for SEBA and you go through the diversification program, they're going to push you back into SEBA because I think their first line says only when you don't qualify for any other program. So the default would be back into SEBA. So I think you don't really have the choice. And then in that circumstance, I'd say take the diversification, take those other programs that the government has put out there. I've had a lot of questions about, I don't think I really need it, but I qualify. I'd say take it. Take it, save it if you don't really need it, and pay it back. I mean, the SEBA, when you pay it back, you get to keep $10,000. And I can tell you, of all the people that have told me that they've applied for the SEBA, I'd say at least 60% of the people probably had the money in the bank to cover their expenses, but they don't know what quarter Q3, Q4. I mean, yesterday we had, and I don't want to get into the health authorities, but we did have one of our major health authorities say that a second wave is coming. We need to prepare for it. Well, as business owners, economically, we need to prepare for it. And if you can get the money now and sit on it for a little bit, good. There are some criteria around the SEBA, to be fair, that you're not supposed to get the loan and pull it out of the company to pay yourself. It is meant to pay operating expenses. So, within the guidelines of taking the money, for sure. But yeah, no, Vincent, I would certainly apply for anything I qualify. I would I would apply for the SEBA first. If for some reason you don't qualify, then you go to the other program.
Okay, thanks. So SEBA first and then try the other one. But just rehashing you said the revised SEBA requirements are for, what was it, 40,000 annual operating costs? Is that was that it? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's for everything. Okay. That would be payroll, rent, insurance, anything. Okay.
Yeah, they gave examples. So if you looked in, your financial statements, anything between revenue and net profit is pretty much, there's some exemptions around penalties and taxes, but that they never make up the majority of your expenses anyways. Yeah, so it's rent, it's interest expense, it's supplies, it's consultants. So if you're in a legal profession and you have to pay couriers, all that sort of stuff is part of that $40,000 for sure.
Okay, thanks. And you were saying the updated criteria is not available through CRA yet, but you said some secondary sources had some of that. Do you know which one specifically I can look at right away?
Right away, if you Googled SEBA updated loan, I know National Post. I was showing a coffee shop this morning, the National Post article. An entity called Video Tax News. A lot of this stuff is behind a firewall, but they will have it. And CRA's website, unfortunately, for some reason, haven't updated. And I know ATB has updated. So if you are an ATB client and you tried to apply through SEBA portal, it will have the updated criteria as of this morning. I haven't personally done it, but I got the email from the banker that said it's all been updated. So yeah, it's all, and I can send it to you afterwards as well, Vincent. Or I maybe while we're talking, if you could send it to Vincent, the criteria. If you can, great. If not, I'll do it after I get off this chat. But knowing you, Vincent, I can say that you do qualify.
Okay, thanks very much, then.
The question will be though, Vincent, and I don't want to, is that if you use a bank that hasn't updated and it's basically three or four kind of clicks of the box, you apply for it and they haven't updated the criteria, you're essentially attesting to something that's not true. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but you probably should wait for the updated criteria to come onto the webpage, just to protect yourself, which I can't imagine wouldn't be done by Monday. So you can wait the weekend. If you're really pressured, I guess you can click something that you're testing to that you know is true, but not written truthfully, I suppose, which I guess opens up some legal doors, which I will not critique. I will not opine on, I suppose.
I'll wait a few days and see for the updated criteria just to be safe anyway. Okay, thanks.
Great. I did want to say a few points as we end this. One of it, Vincent kind of alluded to is, we all want to be honorable people out there. We don't want to take more than what we ought to. But if you qualify, we don't know what the fall is going to be like. We don't even know what next month's going to be like. You've got to build a war chest to keep your businesses going. And if you're feeling a little bit of guilty because you have the cash in the bank or you think you can weather the storm, I would say you're doing this to keep your business, your employees, and your clients and customers afloat. So grab it. If you qualify for it, if you don't use it, you can always give it back. And if the fall is better than some people think, then great, give it back. I'm sure Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Monroe will love to have it. Marno will love to have it back come next January, February. But if you qualify, take it now because we don't know what the fall is going to. And quite frankly, my conversations right now with clients is really, what does the fall look like? As we go into winter, generally things slow down. We know, we don't know anything, I guess, but this province is oil and gas. It doesn't look like any rigs are coming online this fall at all. Drilling won't happen again probably till the spring of 2021. So all that other stuff that comes with the economy is going to slow right down. So I would say take what you can get right now for sure, 100%. So I'll say that. Next, I'll say certainly what I think one of the things as tenants on buildings you can help your landlords with is around the operating costs. Operating costs are included in the rent relief for sure, but I think if you talk to your landlords and you guys can come up with a collective agreement of what's really important this year in the buildings. Do flowers need to be put out? I know these are small things, but they do add up, and they can add up to $3-4 per square foot on your operating costs. And if you're paying $20, that's a 25% increase on your overall rent. So those things might help you with your fixed expenses. If you have those conversations with your landlord and say, hey, listen, maybe we don't need to do a parking lot sweep, and I'll come here on the weekend and sweep up a portion of the parking lot, and the other tenant will, and that will save money for everybody. Those sorts of things I think are really important to really look at in terms of shrinking costs down to help you with that rent overall. Another question I have. Okay, so that person will call us. Or actually, you know what? How about you ask the question now, while I talk about the last point, and then I can answer that. And the last thing that I do want to say, because we still have some clients that are quite pessimistic because they still don't fit into some criteria. We've seen a lot of changes, Eric, around the criteria. We've seen it, and generally what we've seen is the criteria has opened up more and more in all the programs to business owners that take alternative methods of compensation, right? So we saw initially, if we remember way back, the CERB changed to include dividends to owners of companies. We've seen the CEWS expand to include some more things. We're now seeing the CEBA expand to reflect business owners. So there's still a few things that aren't, I guess, what I call business owner friendly. One of the things, of course, is the wage subsidy relates specifically to business owners. We get a lot of questions from clients about what should I do? Should I go on salary now, knowing that I still don't qualify for the wage subsidy because I didn't have any pre-pandemic or March 15th wage, and knowing that maybe they'll change it. I don't know the answer, but I do know that the trend is certainly becoming more and more acknowledging that business owners have specific needs and they need to be attended to in the program. So I am hopeful that things will continue to expand. And all of these changes, to be fair, have been as a result of the opposition parties and business advocate entities pushing the government to change. And this isn't to say that the government, I think, had any bad motives. They just didn't know or they didn't think about it because they were acting quickly. And criticism by the opposition or advice or education to them hadn't changed it. So I want to end with saying, if you think there's better ways to do things, tell me. I'm more than happy to talk to our MPs. I talked to them quite a bit. James Cumming, for one, the business community, the business advocacy communities I'm talking to. So if you have things you think need to be fixed, pass them up, talk to those people directly, talk to myself. We'll make sure that they get that and we can advocate and try to get things changed.
Yeah, so we have the last question here. It is a little bit specific to the office, but it's still a good question for just about everyone. It says, how do accounts receivables work? Our contractors wonder if they can still collect the CERB if they're working but haven't received on collections yet. That's a really good question. That's surrounding income on a monthly basis, because as you know, for CERB, it's a cap of $1,000 a month in order to qualify. I'm not entirely sure how they classify that if it's based on a cash basis for CERB.
Mm-hmm. So I would say this. I would say if you have a contractor who is billing you, the owner, for work they've done, but they haven't received the money, so they don't have a corporation. They're not pushing this money into a corporation. For the purposes of the CERB, because it's based on income taken into your personal bank account, I'd say they could still apply for the CERB. They haven't received the money, and there in the CERB legislation there is this maneuvering of $1,000 you can earn, and when we say earn, in terms of individual pay, it means it's received in your bank account, right? This isn't we don't live as people on accrual accounting. We can't go to the grocery store and accrue our grocery bill. We have to pay hard cash or credit card, I suppose, to buy our groceries. So specific to that question, I would certainly say if you have a contractor who is not incorporated, so they're not using accrual accounting inside a corporation, and they're billing you as a contractor, so they've sent you an invoice and you're not paying because you haven't collected from that person, you haven't paid them, then they haven't received any money for purposes of the CERB, which would be wage for purposes of the CERB benefit. They would qualify and they should apply for the CERB 100%. When they get that money, I suspect you as the business owner, once you collect the money and you cut them the check, then they won't be able to apply for the CERB for that period. Now, so they should be fine. Now, if there's, if people are holding on to income or onto what's legally entitled to them, so they can get the CERB and then pay them July 1st after the CERB has run out, well, that's probably abuse of the spirit of the CERB. And if audited and they got access to your records, it probably wouldn't work out the best for that person. But if legitimately, in order for you to pay them, you need to be paid, and you haven't been paid, therefore you can't pay that subcontractor, then they're fine. I would have no issues with them applying for the CERB. It's both within the rules of the law and and most importantly in the spirit of the law as well. Okay. Having said all that, Eric, do you have any final points?
I don't think I do. I think, actually, I don't know if you touched on it last week, but just a reminder that we are, the Qs, the 75% wage subsidy has been extended to August 29th.
That's right.
But having said that, a lot of people have been asking me, what about the qualification for the last 2 months, basically? There's no specific change yet for the legislation as to what the qualification criteria is going to be for those last 2 months, although it has been said that they're looking at ways to allow for growth, because right now, in a sense, it is somewhat punishing in the long term to cap people on revenue. But so as it stands right now, if you're looking at trying to do like a plan or figure out what your future is going to look like, use the original criteria for now. There's no specific legislation. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I didn't want to go into that in too much detail, but what I've been talking to some influencers in Ottawa about is, and it's not that I have any magic kind of formulas, and they've heard it from many people, is some sort of sliding scale. So a scale where you go from, you require that 30% or more decrease in revenue to perhaps, and then you get 75% perhaps, the scale slides all the way up to only 10%, but the wage subsidy decreases from 75% to perhaps 25%. So if you have a 10% drop in revenue, you only get a 25% wage subsidy. So it's get everyone back to work. It's not it's not an all or nothing approach. So I can't say I'm optimistic because it's a hard program to implement. Not so much to apply for and get the money, but if they're going to audit you, it's really hard for those auditors to kind of wrap their heads around that and kind of timings. But I think that would be a healthy. It's much like the rent relief. I think one of the biggest criteria is 70% is an awful lot. It's an all or nothing approach, and there was a lot of criticism about that. Unfortunately, they didn't change it. And I actually, if you watched the ones 2 weeks ago, I really thought they were going to change the program. So I was wrong on that for sure. So hopefully there is some sliding scale on that. But that's a great point. The last thing I will say, and then we'll be free, is that if you haven't done your personal taxes, they're June 1st. So if you owe money, penalties for not filing on June 1st are still there. Interest will not accrue on the balance owing, but the penalty is still there. So please get your taxes into us today, this weekend, so we're not rushing next Sunday to meet the deadline of June 1st, which is the following Monday. Taxes are still due on June 1st. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great weekend. I think it's not going to be very nice out. But as they say, April showers bring May flowers. This whole year's been delayed, so May showers bring June flowers.
Exactly.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
See you guys.